Hi there, my name is Brandon Flannery, and tonight I'm going to be speaking with you all about the issue of autism. Not autism with a T, but autism with a D. When researching this project, whether it simply be by typing in a word in on Google or on my phone or speaking with someone, I continually had to correct the computer, phone, or person to say, no, I mean audism with a D. And I think this goes to speak about the fact that not many people have even heard of this term or even know what it means. Audism was coined initially by Tom Humphreys in 1975. And he coins it as the notion that one is superior based on one's ability to hear or behave in the manner of one who hears. Another definition that can be defined as a system of advantage based off of hearing ability. And finally, a metaphysical orientation that links human identity with speech. Audism is essentially the oppression that we experience in a society particularly to the deaf community. And for those of us who are hearing, the privilege that we experience in a hearing society. When researching autism, one essay found particularly insightful is one called Audism, Exploring the Metaphysics of Oppression by H. Durkis and L. Bauman from Gallaudet University. In this essay, he ties in the fact that we as a society experience autism because of one thing in particular, and that is the subconscious, or he would say metaphysical belief that someone is less human because they do not speak or they cannot hear. We view them as an incomplete human. And whether or not we agree with this statement, history proves otherwise. He actually quotes a handful of people that I found absolutely appalling, and these were people who in their day were professors, who were intelligent individuals investing their time and energies into the deaf community. Here are some of their words so you can kind of get an example of even the people who are actually particularly trying to help deaf individuals. Johann Conrad Amann, how dull they are in general, how little do they differ from animals. An American oralist, Lewis Dudley, writes that the deaf are human in shape but only half human in attributes. Another quote by Doug Payton explains, to be human was to speak, to sign was a step downward in the scale of being. Abbey Rock Ambrose Sicard, and he said, a perfect non-entity, a living automation. The deaf person lacks even the unfailing instinct direct animals, destined only to have that as their guide. So these are just a handful of voices of professionals who are making claims about a lesser human quality within deaf individuals. So what does this mean? What does this mean for us as a society who, whether we believe it or not, are in a culture that deep down truly does believe that to be deaf is to be incomplete, whether it be through education or health or the workplace. We choose and try to make deaf individuals more human by cochlear implants, by forcing deaf individuals to not use sign language. It can take multiple shapes and forms, and one thing that's probably the most devastating is that autism can be intensely internalized, internal oppression. But this is absurd considering in recent studies of the brain and brain mapping, someone who uses sign language and someone that speaks, they're actually using the same portion of their brain. The brain doesn't differentiate, and so why do we? If you were to begin researching the issue of autism or start exploring in particular the education of the deaf, you will have two names that continually pop out, Alexander Graham Bell and Edward Minor Gallaudet. Now these two individuals approached deafness from two completely separate angles. You have Bell, who desired to integrate deaf individuals into the hearing community. His goal was society as a whole. His goal was to make deaf individuals look as close as they could to hearing. While on the other hand, Edward Minor Gallaudet, his focus was on the individual. It wasn't so much of if they can integrate into society, but it was more so of can they express themselves, can they connect on a human level to other humans. Looking into the stories of these two men, you will see a vast schism. You will see tension. And this schism and tension has continued into the issue of autism and deafness in America and on how we treat deafness, oralism or manualism. One sign in particular that continually describes this tension is sticky. And what I mean by that is that you have completely polarized sides of this issue. Within the schism, you have oralists with Bell on this side who want to pretend that deafness doesn't exist. they want to cure it, or in some very extreme cases, eradicate it. And on the other side, you have the manualists who, if they had it their way, they would have every American speaking sign language. And you may think that this is absolutely absurd, but actually there was a deaf utopia off of the coast of Pennsylvania called Martha's Vineyard, where 1/4 of the population were deaf. And the whole entire population then learned sign language in order to communicate and kind of bring everyone in together. Martha's Vineyard is the manualists' ideal America. So you have these two opposite sides that refuse to reconcile with each other. And when speaking with my brother, who's currently a major in American Sign Language, who hopes to be a translator, he has a wide range of connections within the deaf community. He describes the deaf community almost as a revolving door, that it will gently slow down for you, but if you refuse to get in, it's going to keep going without you. And that's something I even experienced when trying to research this. It was really hard to kind of get resources, but he was a great asset because of the connections that he has now being a part of that revolving door. And I asked him, what do? We have these two polarized opinions, and how do we reconcile the two? Does one need to win over to the other? Do we meet in the middle? What do we do? How can we hearing people be an advocate or an ally? And my brother was talking to me about how there's this immense pride within the deaf community that says we want to do this by ourselves. We want to prove that we can. And so most deaf individuals are asking for allies versus advocates. They're looking for people who will stand by their side, but not fight for them, but hear them out or understand. Probably the best thing that you can do is simply be aware. So be aware so the next time you interact with a deaf person that these internalized prejudices that we have towards deaf individuals will be acknowledged and erased, which is to disagree with that internalized idea that deaf individuals are somehow less human or broken. Again, researching this, I saw many stories of success for deaf individuals, and some varied where the parents invested so dramatically in American Sign Language. They connected with them. They understood, the deaf individual knew that they mattered, and they learned math and science. There's even universities that are devoted to strictly making scientists who are deaf, and there are these success stories of people who have been completely independent of the hearing community, and they're succeeding and growing and doing so well. Then you have other success stories of this one girl in particular who got cochlear implant, has had oralism and speaks, and she wouldn't have had it any other way. Her parents encouraged her to do whatever she wanted to do, and she picked that. She wanted to integrate into a hearing society. She wanted to belong to this, and so we could call that internalized oppression. But seeing these stories, I think both are valid. And I think when it comes to the issue of deafness, instead of deciding for the deaf individual, which is very much so a part of our culture right now, is to hear a story and to connect. One such story is from this girl who is speaking at a Stanford TEDx talk. This girl grew up and chose to receive a cochlear implant. She began lip reading. She learned American Sign Language. She took advantage of all the assets that she could. One day while in class, she decided that she wanted to present a lecture just like everyone else. And she stood up on stage and she presented to this middle school class, speaking with a level of impairment as a result of her deafness. The teacher pulls her aside and says, "No one should ever be forced to listen to that." Now, if that girl listened to that teacher and what she deemed socially acceptable, this girl would never be now lecturing with TEDx. And I think regardless if the deaf individual is purely manualistic, is only fluent ASL, or if they are oralist and they want to lip read and maybe get a cochlear implant and learn to speak, or just like Gallaudet, they want a combined theory and they want to take advantage of all these different tools that they can have. Regardless of the deaf individual, I think every deaf individual's cry is all the same. I am the same as you. I have just as much value as you. I'm just as capable. The only difference between us is I can't hear. In the movie description below, you will find a link to current legislation in regards to cochlear implants. Feel free to check out that website and peruse it and decide if you would like to sign the petition. But I think regardless, the number one thing that we can do is to address this internalized devaluing of deaf individuals that we all carry. That a deaf individual is somehow less human than us. Let's address it so that the next time that we interact with a deaf individual, we can treat that person with respect they deserve.